A young German princess who knows absolutely no Russian suddenly finds herself in Russia, a foreign country with a harsh climate, strict orders, and a mysterious culture. She is only the wife of the heir to the throne, and no one takes her seriously. However, in a few years, this girl becomes the most powerful woman in the history of Russia. This is the story of Catherine the Great, one of the most famous empresses of Russia. Catherine the Great was born on May 2nd, 1729, in the small German town of Stettin, now it is Poland, and at birth was named Sophia Frederica Augusta. There were no hints of future fame and power in her childhood. She was the ordinary daughter of a petty German prince who, like many girls of the time, had to marry to improve her family's position. That all changed in 1744 when she was spotted in Russia. At that time, the Russian throne was ruled by Empress Elizabeth Petrovna, who was looking for a bride for her nephew, Peter Fyodorovich, the future Emperor Peter III. Elizabeth liked Sophia and invited her to Russia. Sophia had to completely change her life. She embraced orthodoxy and changed her name to Catherine, and soon married Peter. Thus began her path to power. In the early years, Catherine felt like a stranger in Russia. She did not know the language, local traditions, and did not understand the intrigues at court. Her marriage to Peter did not work out either. It is said that her husband did not pay attention to her and was more interested in war games than in his wife. However, Catherine quickly realized to survive and succeed, she needed to become a true Russian, and she did the impossible. Catherine began to learn the Russian language, and after a few years spoke it fluently, then won the respect of the court. For her, it was not just knowledge of the language, it was the key to power. After all, the people took her for their own, and this was an important step on her way to the throne. Catherine showed an incredible ability to adapt, which would later become one of her greatest strengths as a ruler. But how did this girl, who started out as an unloved wife and almost forgotten princess, manage to become empress? And at what cost was it given to her? When young Catherine, then still Sophia, arrived in Russia, she was welcomed as the future wife of the heir to the throne. It would seem that she was to become an important figure in the country. But the reality turned out to be quite different. Instead of a romantic marriage to the heir to the throne, a cold, almost hostile life at court awaited her. Catherine found herself in a strange country where her husband, Peter, was clearly not interested in her either as a wife or as a person. So how did her life in Russia begin? Imagine this. A young girl, only 16 years old, leaves her home, her family, her familiar life, and goes to a vast, foreign Russia. She changes her name, her religion, and tries to become her own among people who look at her with suspicion. But the most unpleasant part begins after the wedding. Catherine expected her husband to support her, to take care of her. But Peter was completely different. Once Catherine frankly said that her husband was more fond of playing soldiers than spending time with her. And this was not an exaggeration. Peter III literally spent hours playing with toy armies and admiring the Prussian military while his young wife sat alone. Their marriage was doomed to coldness and alienation from the start. Catherine quickly realized that Peter could not be relied upon for anything, especially in personal matters. It was not love, it was not even a partnership. In fact, Peter himself admitted in public that there was no close relationship between them. This fact gave rise to many rumors at court about Catherine's personal life. There were whispers that she had other men, that she was having affairs on the side. And although Catherine was a woman strong and independent, such rumors could not help but hurt her. In an atmosphere of palace intrigue and gossip, any wrong step could lead to disaster. But what did Catherine do, left virtually without the support of her husband? She did not give up. She began to build her own connections at court, to establish relationships with influential people, to create a circle of those who could support her in a difficult moment. It was during this period that Catherine began to learn how to manage the situation in her favor. While her husband was busy with his toy armies, she was building real power. This became her first step to seizing the throne. And it's important to note here, many women in her shoes would have broken down, but Catherine didn't give in to despair. She realized that her marriage was not love, but a political bargain. And if love is not important here, then she needs to play by other rules. Catherine began to create for herself a completely different role, not as a wife, but as a future ruler. The most amazing thing is that with all this, Peter did not even realize what power his wife was gaining. He continued to treat her as an insignificant figure at court, and that was his biggest mistake. Catherine learned to use her husband's inattention to secretly prepare the ground for his rise to power. A coup d'état. How Catherine seized power. When her husband, Peter III, finally became emperor in 1762, Catherine already realized that this reign would not last long. Peter was on the throne for only 6 months. During this time, he managed to anger almost everyone, and courtiers and the army and ordinary people. He introduced strange reforms in Russia, which went against tradition. For example, he signed a decree that allowed the nobility to no longer serve in the army, which immediately turned the officers against him. But his main blunder was his friendship with Prussia, Russia's opponent in the 7 Years' War. The army, which had just fought against the Prussians, could not forgive this. Catherine, seeing this, realized that her hour had come. She had already spent several years building her connections at court, won the support of the army and the nobility, and most importantly, she was supported by the guards, the very soldiers who could decide the fate of the country. Catherine knew how to exploit Peter's weaknesses. She saw how he was losing authority, and at the moment when he became vulnerable, she struck. The coup d'état happened quickly. It began when a group of officers loyal to Catherine persuaded her to take power. They were ready to overthrow Peter. On the night of June 27th to 28th, 1762, Catherine arrived at the barracks of the guards in St. Petersburg, where she was greeted as Empress. She wore a military uniform, which made a strong impression on the soldiers. At that moment, everything was decided. The army sided with her. After that, she went to the highest state bodies and declared herself the ruler of Russia. Peter was out of town at the time and, having learned of the coup, tried to resist. But his attempts to regain power were futile. Catherine already controlled the army and key figures of power. Just a few days later, Peter abdicated, and Catherine officially became Empress. Just like that, in 1 week, Catherine went from unloved wife to the strongest figure in the Russian Empire. It was a truly unprecedented coup when a woman who was not even born in Russia managed to seize power in a huge country. But what happened to Peter III after his overthrow? Just a few days after his abdication, he was sent into exile to one of the palaces, where he was soon murdered. The official version was that his death was the result of a fight with the guards, but many historians still believe that it was a contract killing, and Catherine may have known about the plot. She never openly admitted her involvement, but this fact has forever remained a mystery of her reign. Ironically, by overthrowing her husband and becoming ruler, Catherine became one of the most respected and beloved empresses by the people. She did what Peter III could not. She won the trust of the army and the nobility. Although her rise to power was built on a coup and possible assassination, her reign would later become known as Russia's Golden Age. The reign of Catherine, greatness and reforms. Catherine was not just a ruler, she was an intelligent and active woman who clearly knew what she wanted to achieve. Her main weapon was knowledge. Even though she was not born in Russia, she realized that to be successful, you need to know more than others. Therefore, Catherine read a lot, studied the laws and reforms of other countries. In her letters, she constantly discussed political and economic issues. These were not empty correspondences. She was really interested in how to make Russia stronger. Catherine was particularly inspired by the ideas of the French enlighteners. She corresponded with Voltaire, Montesquieu, and other famous philosophers of the time. Voltaire, for example, was not just her teacher. He became a true friend, and Catherine respected his ideas about liberty, human rights, and progress. This influenced her desire to introduce reforms that could make Russia more modern. One of her first and most important reforms was the reform of government. She wanted power not to be concentrated only in the hands of the emperor, as it had been in the past, but to be more fair and organized. Catherine divided the country into provinces and improved the court system. There was now a clear power structure in Russia, where there were not only punishments, but also laws that protected people's rights. But even here, Catherine went further. She tried to introduce the nakaz, which was supposed to be a new constitution based on the ideas of human rights and equality. This was a truly revolutionary decision for the time. Besides politics, Catherine also realized that Russia needed cultural changes. She built theaters, museums, and academies. Under Catherine, the Imperial Academy of Arts was founded to help develop talent in the country. Catherine dreamed of Russia being considered on par with other great European powers, and she succeeded. She also introduced reforms concerning agriculture and the economy. Catherine actively promoted trade, expanding Russia's territories and increasing the country's income. By the end of her reign, Russia had become not only a military but also an economic power. But not everything was so smooth. Catherine had to face internal conflicts, revolts, and criticism. One of the most serious challenges was the rebellion of Emelian Pugachev, which took place in the 1770s. It was one of the largest peasant uprisings in Russian history. Pugachev claimed that he was the real Emperor Peter III and raised a huge army. The revolt was put down, but it showed that not everyone supported Catherine, and the country needed major social changes. Nevertheless, Catherine continued to rule despite the difficulties. One of her major achievements was that she increased Russia's territory by almost 520,000 square kilometers. These were the conquered lands in the south and west that made Russia the largest country in the world. But as much as it seems that Catherine sought progress, there are two contradictory conclusions about her reign. The first is that she tried to bring ideas of freedom and equality to Russia, but she supported serfdom, which effectively made the peasants slaves. This was her compromise with the nobility to hold on to the throne. Second, although she dreamed of an enlightened country, her reforms did not affect the majority of the population, and social inequality only increased under her. The personal life of the Empress, lovers, and intrigues. Catherine the Great was not only an outstanding ruler, but also a woman with a turbulent personal life, which gave rise to many rumors and gossip. Many believe that her reign was inextricably linked to her love affairs. She had several famous favorites, each of whom played an important role not only in her life, but also in the affairs of state. Back in the days of her marriage to Peter III, Catherine was unhappy. Their relationship quickly cooled, and she began to seek solace in other men. Her first significant favorite was Sergei Saltykov, with whom she may have had even more than a romantic relationship. Saltykov was a man of intelligence and ambition, and Catherine trusted him more than her husband. This was the first step on her way to surrounding herself with strong men who not only supported her as a woman, but also helped her in politics. When Catherine became Empress, she had already realized how important it was to have loyal men by her side. And it was during this period that her personal life began to intertwine with the affairs of the state. One of her most famous favorites was Grigory Orlov. It was not just a lover, Orloff became a true associate of Catherine. It was he and his brothers who helped Catherine organize a coup against Peter III. In gratitude for his loyalty, she rewarded Orlov with titles and palaces. This caused a lot of envy at court. Imagine how the other nobles reacted to the fact that the man who got everything thanks to his relationship with the Empress, in fact, became the second person in the country. But the most famous favorite of Catherine was, of course, Grigory Potemkin. Their relationship was full of passion and admiration for each other. Potemkin was not only her lover, but also one of the most influential politicians of her reign. Their affair officially ended after a few years, but Potemkin is said to have continued to influence her decisions even after the separation. In fact, he remained her right-hand man for the rest of his life. It was Potemkin who played a key role in the expansion of the Russian Empire to the south and the building of new cities such as Sevastopol. But here's the amazing thing. Although Catherine was known for her many romances, she always kept her feelings under control. Each of her favorites didn't just enjoy her attention, they had to be of benefit to the country. Catherine gave her lovers palaces, lands, and titles, but in return she expected loyalty and support in state affairs. Not everyone could withstand such a role, and many favorites, when they lost her favor, lost everything they had gained. Catherine was never shy about having lovers. While many rulers hid their liaisons, she openly showed that her private life was her choice. But what makes her an even more interesting figure is that she was able to share love and power. Despite her feelings, she always remained in charge of politics and did not let her relationships overshadow her as a ruler. Despite her love for the ideas of freedom, Catherine was unable to abolish serfdom, which on the contrary only increased under her rule. The nobles gained more power, while the peasants remained in slave-like conditions. This paradox in her reign remains one of the biggest mysteries. How could a woman who preached freedom and progress maintain one of the most brutal systems of exploitation? It is also interesting how Catherine was able to hold on to power in a country where intrigue and conspiracies were commonplace. During her 34-year reign, there were several attempts on her life and complex intrigues at court. But Catherine was always able to maintain control, so her reign remains a symbol of stability and strength. But despite all her achievements, the life of Catherine the Great remains shrouded in mystery. It is still unknown what happened in the last days of her life. In 1796, she suddenly fell ill and died without leaving a will, which caused a serious power struggle after her death. After her death, Russia turned out to be a completely different country from the one she had inherited. Catherine, who came to power through a coup and ruled with an iron hand, forever changed not only the face of Russia, but also its place on the world stage.